So welcome to our fifth discussion of Aristophanes. I'm going to digress. So I am showing an image, which I can't show you, of a Greek vase where a woman is playing a kithara and there are two women listening, one leaning on the shoulder of the other one. Can you see that on the little screen? Okay. This is an illustration of what happened in the Symposium. The kithara player is sent off and just to play amongst the women. Yeah, she was in this. And then, yeah, okay. So actually, I'll just say one or two very simple things about poetry and philosophy, because we're going to discuss Aristophanes' speech. So, philosophy depends entirely on the fact that we have a mind. Yes, I make that assertion, an intellect in the Greek. But that means, if there's no ordered whole of which the mind is a part and can be open to, there can't be an ordered whole if the mind is one with the whole. That there's no ordered whole to see. You're just a non-thinking absorption in it. And that's got something to do with the problem of the two halves that Aristophanes splits in. But we'll come back to that. And so unless there's, and the traditional name for the ordered whole is that there's a cosmos. Right. Now, poetry, as we understand it from Plato, is of two kinds. There's the original form, which is making the cosmos. There is no original order of which the order that the poet brings, the orderliness, the adornment, is an image. The poet's orderliness and adornment is the original. Now, in Plato, poetry can be instrumental, right? In which case it provides an image of the cosmos or human nature. And this is what Plato wants to do in his poetic works, is to show that poetry is necessarily subordinate to the thought of the poet and to the mind of the poet. And if the poet thinks that through, then there's something prior to the making. That's just a very general background suggestion. Now, the genuine poet that Plato exhibits, well, two of them represent both sides of poetry, tragedy and comedy. And Plato wants to exhibit something true about tragedy and comedy, and part of that is to show, A, how they're fused with one another, because the comic speech is in fact tragic.
Martin, could you just explain what you mean by making the cosmos, please?
Well, that there is no order, no cosmic and human order, but prior to the poet. You know how Hesiod says, first of all, Hesiod says, the muses, who can lie like the truth and tell the truth when they want to, said that first of all, chaos came to be. So there's an original chaos, and out of the chaos came to be what the Platonic characters refer to as the cosmological gods, the Uranian gods, sun, stars, heaven, earth. Right? But there's so far no human beings, no civilization. It's only with the advent of the Olympian gods, of gods that have what we call anthropomorphic characteristics, that you begin to get, that you first get human beings and then get civilized human beings. So the poets themselves teach that there's a kind of chaos prior to the gods that they make. Similar thing in Homer, where he talks about the character Proteus, the first thing. And Proteus is a character that Odysseus has to struggle with to get home. He has to get directions from, and Proteus can assume the shape of anything. So what's the Protean first principle of all things? Imagination. And without that imagination that makes the gods and makes the laws that human beings live by, there's no human order, there's no political community, there's no human life. So I take it that these are hints of the original poetic view that they are the makers of the human order and the order of the whole that goes with it.
Okay, can I just make a comment that in following your course, I'm reading Rosen's Symposium.
Yep.
And I'm finding it very, very difficult because there's an assumption that the reader is very familiar with the gods and that history that you're just talking about. And I'm not. And so I found reading Rosen's Symposium very, very difficult. But you're touching on what he's talking about by your explanation just now. I'm wondering if, separate to this course, it would be useful to run another course which would give the foundations from where the Greek thinkers are coming from in terms of their gods, which, as a kind of modernist, in the past, I found it difficult to connect with, but in doing your courses, I'm becoming much more empathetic to the idea of the gods within ancient Greek thinking.
Yeah, it's for those of us who are, heirs to somewhere between 1400 and 2400 years of a different kind of theology, depending upon which stream of that has had most influence on you. It's a radically different notion of what a god is. And far more, so people who look, especially 19th century, 18th century scholars who've looked back at the Greeks have tended to import their own notions in understanding what the poets mean and what the philosophers mean. So, but Rosen's book is wonderful, and I have not reread it, and no doubt I would think I would be reduced to reading you certain paragraphs if I did reread it, because but as you say, it's very, very difficult, and I intend to offer a much simpler reading, and hopefully we can sort something out as a basis for further inquiry. Because I think this speech by Aristophanes, it's a brilliantly exposition by Plato, because it's a fundamental philosophical alternative to his view. But it's a fundamentally poetic view of the world as opposed to philosophy. But like all of the speeches in the Symposium, to some degree, including Socrates, it's meant to show inner tensions, and it shows that very clearly in the end.
Thank you.
Alan, did you want to?
Yes, just following up on that, I've got this translation by Avi Sharon. I don't know if you're familiar with that. If you are, what do you think of it?
I've got that actually, because when I was in Boston, I was sitting in on these courses on Sophocles and Pindar with a guy called a professor called Esposito, who worked for Focus Philosophical Library, of which that is an edition.
Yes.
So he's published lots of translations, I think, of Aristophanes with them. And I think it's a good series. They're all pretty good. And that's a good version. I've read that. I don't want to annoy you, but there's an even better one that I haven't read, but it's just come out by Eva Bran, Kalkovich, and another guy from St. John's College. I've got it on order just because even if you don't need the translation, they just her especially her texts are always extremely illuminating, I find. But yeah, so
What's that name, Martin, that you just
Eva
mentioned?
Brand.
Bran. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, not the
I've
other one.
also, the other one I've got is the Cambridge text by Howardson and Frisbee, which I started using, but quite honestly, I found that the Avi Sharon one is much more reader friendly.
Good. Yeah, I haven't read the Cambridge one. So, but yeah, I think that is a good translation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so
Martin, can I just ask?
oh, sorry.
So this is Aristophanes' account that we're looking at.
I was just suggesting that poetry has two places in Plato. The first is his depiction of what I was calling the original version, which is how Hesiod and Homer present themselves. Now they present themselves in a way that, as Socrates in the Republic says, they have a surface and they have a secret teaching. And the surface is there are these gods who enforce the law, so don't break the law or we'll punish you. The more hidden teaching is that there's a primeval chaos, and we, the poets, have made the gods, and therefore we've made you civilized human beings. Plato's teaching has that depiction of poetry in here, as for example in Aristophanes' speech. But he is arguing constantly that poetry ought to be subservient to the poet's understanding of himself as a thinker. Okay. And what we're going to see in Aristophanes' speech is that there's no place for the mind or speech to be the typical human activity. Right. So directly in contrast with Plato and Aristotle, who say our capacity to speak and understand one another is the species characteristic that defines us. And that's a reflection of the world we live in and of our nature. Yeah. That's the opposite of what Aristophanes is about to say. Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Did I cover your question in that brief exposition?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Now, I just wanted to read one sentence from when Eric Simicus finished.
Can you make it larger?
I'm sorry?
Can you make it larger, please?
I may lose control of my computer, but I will try.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's, yeah, I have to get when I get Eva Brand's translation, I'm going to photocopy it so there's one per page and it's not in this awkward format. Is that okay?
And where are we?
We're at 188E, E1, where he says, now, perhaps in praising, so this is Eric Simicus. Now, Eric Simicus began by saying, Pausanias, not Phaedrus, right? Pausanias made a good start. There's a noble and a base eros, but I'm going to give it a telos. I'm going to bring it to a completion. And that completion is the cosmological. Right? Now, the problem is, if you start from the human and then go to the cosmological, you'll usually project your human preferences upon the cosmos. Right? And vice versa. If you go to the cosmos and then think like Newton, like there are laws that govern the movement of the planets, they must also govern the movement of the smaller things like humans. Then you will distort the human phenomena. So there is a real problem about what is the correct openness to the whole that includes human and cosmos. That's a problem. But Eric Simicus is presenting this sort of scientific imperialism that we can understand the whole in the same way that we understand the human part. And then he says at E1, now perhaps in praising Eros, now what's interesting is that he has mainly said, how do we control Eros with my art so that we can reap the pleasure without harm? So that's not an erotic activity, that's moderating Eros in order to reap pleasure. So eros is directed towards pleasure, and eros is neither noble nor base. We control it and make it useful. So it's, yeah, as a praise of eros, it's a praise of his art, which is what he said at the beginning of his whole speech. So he praises art. Pausanias does not praise, he can't even mention the activity that he's trying to praise. He spends the whole speech, which is the second longest speech in the dialogue, not saying what he's talking about, because he doesn't want to praise it. He praises eros for the character and excellence that it brings with it, not for it in itself, because he can't praise it in itself, because it's a bit disreputable. And he's trying to fix that by bringing together these two opposing laws or customs. Right? And Phaedrus isn't praising eros for itself. It's not good to be erotic because you're the one who volunteers to die for your beloved. Right? So we haven't really had a praise of eros from the point of view of someone who has the experience of it. It never, okay, but so now perhaps in praising eros, I too am omitting many things, but I have done that unwillingly. For if I did omit anything, it is your job, Aristophanes, to fill it in, right? Or if you intend to make a different eulogy of the god, do so, right? Now, so he thinks, okay, we've covered the cosmos and the humans, that's it. Maybe you can fill in some details. The first words from Aristophanes in a minute we'll see are, I'm going to do this in a different way. So he's also going to discuss the relation between the cosmos and the human world, but it's in a different way. It's in a poetic way, which he thinks is more true than the art and science of Eryximachus. Now, at 189a1, he then said, so presumably Aristodemus then said to Apollodorus that Aristophanes accepted and said, the hiccups, has stopped, to be sure. Not, however, before sneezing had been applied to it. So I wonder at the orderly decency of the body. The orderly decency of the body is the kosmios. Orderly is kosmios, which is a word obviously related to cosmos. Right? So Eryximachus has discussed the whole cosmos, and Aristophanes is making the joke that the orderliness of the body requires these odd sounds and, the orderliness of the body desiring such noises and garglings as a sneeze is. So these ugly sounds that the body makes are somehow required for the orderliness of the body, the decency of the body. So Eryximachus is making a kind of error if he thinks that we can just control everything and everything will be beautiful and a harmonious whole. You can't forget the body. Right? Now, Eryximachus then says, you compel me to be a guardian of your own speech. Right? Okay. And then, Aristophanes says that do not be my guardian, for in what is about to be said, I am not afraid to say laughable things. That would be a gain and native to our muse, that is, of comedy. But only things that are laughed at. So laughable things, there's a word for laughter, like galoia, and laughed at is kata galoia. So things that are, laughed at rather than just laughable. And Eryximachus said, okay, just pay attention because you're going to have to render an account, that is, give a defense speech. If you say something I don't like. Because Eryximachus has sort of convened, he was the one who came in and said, okay, it's all been agreed, we're going to give a speech on eros, and he used an expression that convenes a political assembly, doke. So it's, he's put himself in the position of political convener. Only certain things are speakable. Okay, so then Aristophanes begins at C2, 189 C2. Well, Eryximachus, Aristophanes said, I do intend to speak in a somewhat different vein from that in which you and Pausanias spoke. Right? So they spoke in the vein that there is a good and bad eros. So we need to see if there's a good and bad eros. I don't think there's a good eros and a bad eros in Aristophanes. There's just eros, which is about to say, okay, I'll read on. Human beings, in my opinion, have been entirely unaware of the power of eros. Now, Eric Symmachus, 15 lines before, has just said, eros has the greatest power to bring human happiness and blah, blah. But he's saying that's all wrong. You've misunderstood the phenomenon. So human beings, in my opinion, have been entirely unaware of the power of eros, since if they were aware of it, they would have provided the greatest sanctuaries and altars for him, and would be making him the greatest sacrifices, and not act as they now do when none of this happens to him, though it most certainly should. So by the end of the speech, we want to understand why is A, eros the most powerful god, and B, not treated as a god, not by building temples and making sacrifices. Okay, so at D1, he says, for eros, the reason why they should be treating eros this way, eros is the most philanthropic, the most beneficial for humans, a helper of human beings, as well as a physician. So not forget Eric Symmachus and his art. The genuine physician of human harm is eros, a physician dealing with an illness, the healing of which would result in the greatest happiness for the human race. Okay, that's the promise. Now, I don't want to, destroy the ending if you haven't got there yet, but this speech is about a promise that in principle cannot be fulfilled, right? So eros promises the greatest happiness and cannot provide it. Right? Okay, which is why human beings are comic. We are desperately devoted in our most intimate desire. We have a longing that is in principle impossible of fulfillment. And if we were to fulfill it, we'd destroy what we have. That makes human beings comic. Plato does a great job of showing the comic thinking behind Aristophanes in the plays, but then showing his own critique of it, which I hope to develop as we go on. So Aristophanes says, so I shall try to initiate you into his power, and you will be the teachers of everyone else. I will initiate a new cult. So that the Greeks, the Athenians, were constantly bringing in new gods, like in the beginning of the Republic. Bendis is a new god, a Thracian god being introduced into Athens. So when Socrates is put on trial and executed for introducing new daimonic things, it's actually the Athenians who are just as much guilty of this charge, right? But that's the nature of this, of their understanding of the gods. Okay, he says, but you must first understand human nature and its afflictions. Now, this is what's very interesting from the point of view of reading Plato, is Aristophanes is talking about nature and cause with philosophical terms. But what he's going to show is that we cannot understand nature. So he says, our nature in the past was not the same as now, but of a different sort. First of all, the races of human beings were three, gener, kinds, the kinds of human being, just in case anyone's confused by our extremely narrow and unhelpful expression race. The races or kinds of human beings were three, not two as now, male and female. For there was also a third race, a third kind that shared in both, a kind whose name still remains, though it itself has vanished. For at that time, one race was androgynous. Andros is the genitive of the word aner, man, and gunus, androgynous comes from guner, gunikos, a woman. And in looks and name, it combined both, the male as well as the female. But now it does not exist except for the name that is reserved for reproach. So if you're an overly masculine woman or an overly feminine man, you are, in this very judgmental society, reproached. Okay, so that's the first thing. Human beings are of those three different kinds. Second, and what's striking how systematic the poets are. Agathon almost sets up, okay, I have 3 axioms, 4 propositions, and my speech divides into the following 16 parts. and then he carries it out. There's something like that in this too. Secondly, the looks. Now, form. The form. So Plato uses the term form for the intelligible character of a thing. And I mentioned before, like there must be something in the cosmos or the whole or its parts that is accessible to the mind. His word for that access is form. Now, Aristophanes is going to show us that this form is not accessible to us. Our original nature is not accessible to us. And philosophy is therefore a complete waste of time. Okay. The looks of each human being were, as a whole, round, with back and sides in a circle. And each had 4 arms and legs equal in number to the arms, and 2 faces alike in all respects, on a cylindrical neck, but there was one head for both faces. They were set in opposite directions, and 4 ears, and 2 sets of genitals, and all the rest that one might conjecture from this. Okay. I was looking online for illustrations of the original, and then what happens when Zeus gets hold of them. And AI has destroyed images. Like there's all these AI images, and I used to look for things, and then 1,000 Greek vases would show up, and I could pick one that was helpful. But now it's all ridiculous AI constructed. I mean, I can just go to the Berlin Museum and have a look, but yeah, the internet has gone to become even worse. Sorry, you're going to object to my AI hatred.
No, I'm going to double down on it. But yeah, just the triennial at the NGV had a AI exhibition, and it was a animated one, and there were a couple of different versions of the round people in it. Yeah. But yeah, it was a dystopia, of course, of just lots of weird, crazy creatures. But yeah, that's the closest I've ever come to seeing what these guys look like. Right.
There's got to be good images somewhere. I've seen a fake Greek vase image, which just looks fake. It doesn't look like an original, but they've got the right mannerisms of the black and orange. Yeah. Anyway. Okay. So yeah, we're still on the original nature. Each used to walk upright too. So this is going to be important for what follows, right? So what characterizes human beings as we are now? Well, if you ask Aristotle, we can speak, we walk upright, we can see each other, right? Whereas these beings can all walk upright, just as one does now, in whatever direction he wanted, either of the two, right? Either of the two directions. And whenever he had the impulse to run fast, then just as tumblers with their legs straight out actually move around as they tumble in a circle, so did they, with their 8 limbs as support, quickly move in a circle. Now that's meant to be comic, and it kind of is, like these little beings with their 8 arms and legs just rolling along. And that's our original nature. Right? It is for this reason that the races were, okay, and then he comes into the reason of why, A, they're 3, and B, they have the characteristics that they have. Because the male was in origin the offspring of the sun, the female of the earth, and the kind that shared in both of the moon, since the moon also shares in both. Right? So the moon is made of earth, but it reflects the sun. Right? And they themselves were globular, round, as was their manner of walking, because they were like their parents. Okay, so I'll just pause for 1 second. So we have sun, moon, earth, and these we would call like cosmic beings, and in this story, gods. Right. And then we have the human beings, there's 3 kinds, they're all round. I'm not going to draw one. You're safe. Yeah, but they can walk upright on their, how many, they've got 4 legs. 8 arms, a head, round head, just keep pointing in either direction. Okay, that's the first part. Cosmic beings related to, human beings in the image of cosmic beings or gods, right? Now they will, this is down at 190, B5. Now they were awesome in their strength and robustness. So the original nature is wildly strong. It has strength because it's wild, because it's not tamed. Right? And they had great and proud thoughts, right? The same expression that Pausanias used for the people who when the Persians controlling the Greeks didn't want the Greeks under their control to have proud thoughts of independence. So they oppressed them. And we're going to get exactly the same situation here. And the expression proud thoughts can just mean ambition. That's the colloquial translation. But yeah, proud thoughts is the literal translation. So they attack the gods, right? They want to be completely independent of the gods. That's their natural way. And what Homer says about Ephialtes and Otis is said about them, right? So what Plato is having Aristophanes say about Homer is that Homer makes up a myth about some giants that attack the gods, but he's actually talking about our original nature attacking the gods. That's actually what is being said. And yeah, what he says about them is said about our original nature, that they attempted to make an ascent, an attack into the heaven, Uranos, right, into the sky, with a view to assaulting the gods. Okay, now, all of a sudden, then Zeus and the other gods deliberated as to what they should do with them. Now, they're attacking which gods? Okay, all of a sudden, we have Olympian gods. Zeus, Hephaestus, Apollo, Aphrodite, Ares, etc. Right. All of a sudden. Right. So, but aren't those the gods? And these gods are going to tame our original nature and turn it into the typical human character that we understand now, which is a reflection of their character. But where do they come from? That's just a completely open question at the moment. But it's a very sudden transition, which is not explained for us, and which we have to just make sense of by the end of the speech.
You said that they attacked the gods because they wanted to be independent of them.
Yes.
But that's not what it says here. I mean,
What
it doesn't.
This?
Well, it might, but it says that. I mean, the only hint is that it's in the manner of what Homer says about Ephialtes and Otis.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Giants who don't want to be dependent on the gods. I mean, but just the two things: the great strength and therefore confidence, and the desire and the great thoughts. Right? If you have great ambition, it's because you think you deserve to rule. Simply, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, you can attack the gods because you want to rule them, or you can attack them because you want to be independent of them. Why isn't it the former?
I identify the two.
Okay.
Yeah. If there's a nuance between those two that should be sorted out, we can, see if that leads somewhere as we go. Okay, so then Zeus and the other gods deliberated as to what they should do with them. And they were long perplexed, and the word used is the same word that everyone in Platonic dialogues is described as, the condition that they all described as when Socrates says, but you've just said before the opposite of that, and they're at a loss, they're perplexed, right? So here we get to see Zeus, at a loss, and they were perplexed for a long time. So you can see the gods, like trying to think things through. For the gods knew neither how they could kill them and just as they had struck the gods with lightning. So they got rid of the gods by lightning and killing. They struck them with lightning and killed them. Problem solved, right? They didn't know how they could kill them and obliterate the race, for in that case, their own honours and sacrifices from the human beings would vanish, nor how they could allow them to continue to behave licentiously. Right. So the motive of the gods is what?
To be worshipped.
Yeah, pure self-interest, right? They're calculating, hang on, we need the sacrifices but we can't allow them to behave in this way. And licentiously, that's odd because they're not being threatened sexually, they're being threatened with being taken over, right? But this is the first hint that the punishment inflicted upon the humans is most of all directed at making human beings orderly in their sexual behavior. Right? Because civilizations and families are not possible without that, without people having strict self-control and eros being directed in certain orderly ways and not in disorderly ways. Right? Okay.
Sorry, how is that connection?
Sorry.
How is that connection made? So my understanding thus far was that humans were in trouble because they were making an attempt on the gods.
Yes.
In the sense that Ephialtes and Otis had made an attempt on the gods. What's the connection between that, the nature of that attempt, and curing or curbing the sexual licentiousness of the humans? And where does that intersect with?
So when he says that, he says, what Homer says about Ephialtes and Otis, what he says about them is actually about our original nature. And so what he is suggesting is that when Homer, say, makes the gods, what Homer is doing is, and he makes a story about the gods defeating the giants, he's actually making a story about the triumph of the first principles of our society over our original barbaric nature.
Which was fundamentally sexually...
Well, sexual license is at the core of it. Like the two worst... Okay, so Aristotle, in the second chapter of the first book of the Politics, he says, when he makes this famous statement that human beings are more political than the other animals, more political because we possess speech and therefore a perception of good and bad. And because we have a perception of good and bad, we have a perception of just and unjust. And then he says, still, the person who first founded a political community is responsible for the greatest benefits to human beings. So we're by nature directed towards a community, but there has to be a founder who makes us act in a certain way. And then he says the reason for that is because human beings have arete, excellence, and logos, reason, and these are extremely powerful and can be used for good or bad for the worst things, for example, eating and sex. And he means cannibalism and incest. So at the core of the rituals and the beliefs that allow there to be families and communities is the prohibition on incest and cannibalism. This is what he's suggesting. Okay. And this is what Aristophanes is suggesting. He's saying that myth about the giants, that's actually a parable of our conquering our nature to make it civilized. It's just a suggestion, and it's just one word, and it comes in soon in a way that's more explicit. I'm just bringing it into the open so that then I can pile up more evidence as we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so they can't destroy them because they need the sacrifices, but they can't let them behave licentiously or attack them, right? So then Zeus thought hard, and if you read Aristophanes, he appears to make fun of everyone and everything, including the gods. But ultimately, the teaching of the comedies is a return to the laws and the gods. Which seems bizarre. How do you do that after having mocked everyone, including Zeus? And he's mocking Zeus, like Zeus is tapping his forehead and thinking, what can I do about Yeah, but it ends up with a recommendation of piety. And we have to see what happens. And that means the recommendation that instead we have a cult for Eros, that's going to have to fall away. Okay. So then Zeus thought hard and says, in my opinion, yeah, that's the same word that Eric Simicus used to it seems good to the community. But again, in my opinion, I have a device whereby human beings would continue to exist and at the same time, having become weaker, would stop from their licentiousness. I shall cut each of them in two, he said, and they will be both weaker and more useful to us through the increase in their numbers. Right. So the gods are not obviously worthy of wonder, admiration, and reverence, right? They're these dopes who are just purely taking advantage of us. Right? That's the appearance. Okay, and they will walk upright on two legs like we do, like Zeus does, right? Okay. Yep.
Is there anything about that through the increase in their numbers that speaks to the original humans' nature in terms of mind? It struck me that, okay, they've looked at, two sets of arms, two sets of legs and two faces, one head. So they're actually one. And slicing them down the middle just means, well, we've got two of those. But he's saying they're increased in number, which means, does that then create two minds? Are these two minds in the same original human? Or is that just a frolic that we don't really need to investigate? It's just that increase in numbers, it just seems that almost dehumanizes them into just autonomons.
It at least abstracts from the unity of a mind.
Yeah.
Like if they each have great thoughts, then now aren't you destroying the mind that had those thoughts?
And now we've got more of them and they can worship us.
Yeah.
And that sort of just seems to diminish their nature.
Yeah.
So that's
that definitely fits in with the notion that what Aristophanes is concerned about is not explaining the mind.
Yeah.
Like it's just not a factor for the gods, and it doesn't speak to our essence. Yeah. Which for a brilliant playwright who read everything is odd. But our whole educational institutions are like that now. So okay. So
Could I
yes, please, please. Just
So one thought that comes to mind is, I don't necessarily know the section particularly well, I've read it before, but is there a sense in which you could say two people can be of the same mind when there's a complementarity to the way that they think?
yes.
And following from that, say that these primordial beings are kind of divided at a certain point in time, and then from that point, thenceforth, they seek to reunite themselves in a certain sort of romantic love.
Yes.
Couldn't you pitch that as their attempt to become of one mind in relationship, as we might say two people are if they're in a romantic relationship and they're especially well suited to one another?
I wish you'd said this in an hour and a half time, because there's this beautiful line, which I don't know how Benedict translates it till we get there, but at the end, he presents this cracked compromise of our existence, which is the best possible case is that we meet our genuine other half. The second best, now he implies that's not possible. Right? The second best is that you meet a beloved that is kata noon, in accord with your mind. But he's just shown in the whole thing that there is no one in accord with your mind, because the mind is not the heart of your eros. It's that which completes you or makes you whole, because it literally was torn off you. Right? But it cannot be found, because we're using the expression one's other half. It's almost, he's taken that literally, but on the level of the body, not the mind. Right? So so there's no space in this for meeting someone in accord with your mind. I think that's what Plato is having him suggest about his own speech.
Right.
That it's just simply an inarticulate desire to be with this person who makes you feel whole. And what you're suggesting, and that what that expression, kata noon, later on, that points more towards Socrates' speech.
Right.
Where there is a basis, there is a cosmological basis for human friendship and love.
Okay, so we'll get there.
We'll get there. We'll get there. Although I do say that every class. And
You do.
okay. Okay, so he says, if they continue to behave licentiously, he's going to cut them in half again, and they'll go around hopping on one leg, right? So as soon as he said this, he began cutting the human beings in two, just like those who cut sorb apples. Now, I am not familiar with sorb apples. I have looked it up on this thing called a computer, and it's some kind of European strain of apple. But anyway, apples. In preparation for pickling, or those who cut eggs with hairs. Now,
That, but I have no idea what they're talking about.
so he's talking about certain arts for modifying nature to make it useful for human beings, right? This is the beginning of civilization, right? But when you modify nature, you denature it, right? If you want to have dogs, you'll no longer have the wild wolves and their strength and so on. You will have your domesticated, denatured dog, right? Domesticated, right? And this is a suggestion of that. That this splitting of our original archaic nature, first nature, is our being domesticated and made ready for civilization. And that's more important than the arts, like the pickling and so on. It's the same thing, but that's the encompassing change. Those arts are subordinate to that. So Eric Simicus' notion that the art triumphs over awe is false. You have to have the gods, right? Okay, who were doing the cutting. And whenever he cut someone, he had Apollo turn the face and half the neck to face the cut, so that in beholding his own cutting, the human being might be more orderly. Now, that beholding is the word used for theoretical contemplation. There is no mind and no theory in Aristophanes' speech. The only act of beholding, it's never the beholding of the beloved. And that's central to Socrates' discussion of love. Plato has Diotima teach Socrates the following, that there are people who, when they fall in love, would want to be with and look upon their beloved. Be with can be in the company of, it can be in sexual relations. These two things, uniting and looking upon, but they're distinct. You can't have both at once, I suggest, right? There's two aspects of eros, want to be with and look upon. Aristophanes gives everything to being with in eros and no looking upon. There's no theory. And that's a hint of that, because our only contemplation is of our deficiency and dependence upon the gods, who could do this to us again so that we are destroyed, right? Okay, so that we become more orderly. And that's it, 190E. Yeah, cosmiorteros. We become more orderly. And it's that word derived from cosmos, cosmiorteros. Okay. And he had him heal all the rest. Okay, so then Apollo follows these instructions. Apollo turned the face around, and by drawing together the skin from everywhere toward what is now called the belly, just like drawstring bags, another evolution of minor domestic human arts, by which we use natural things, we take them from nature and use them to our own purposes. He made one opening, which he tied off in the middle of the belly, and that is what they call the navel. He shaped up the chest and smoothed out many of the other wrinkles with somewhat the same kind of tool as shoemakers use in smoothing the wrinkles in leather on the wooden shoe. literally a wooden shoe. But he left a few wrinkles, those on the belly itself and the navel, to be a reminder of our ancient affliction. So the word is pathos, and he used it on the previous page. Aristophanes said, I'm going to tell you about our ancient nature and its pathos, its suffering. Right? And that's also a hint that, Aristophanes' speech is a speech about the tragedy of human nature, of which Aristophanes makes a comedy. Okay, then at 191a5, so he says, he's translated perfectly well, when its nature was cut in two, each, desiring its own half, came together. Now, literally, it says, when nature was cut in two. And I think that's deliberate because human beings are the only beings who use arts and sciences and laws as opposed to instinct and maybe habit. Right? That splits nature in two. So there are things that we construct and constructions that we live by, and for all of the postmodernists and so on, that all of that construction is sheer construction and arbitrary. Perhaps it's a structure developed out of the non-intelligible will to power of certain classes or whatever it is, but it's not in accord with any nature. It's a sheer construction and therefore should be deconstructed or shared out or whatever it is. Right? But that's a very similar view by no coincidence, because it derives from people like Nietzsche who actually understood some of these things. It's very similar to this. Nature is split for the first time in human beings when we make ourselves civilizable, able to be live in political communities. So nature is cut in two. When nature is cut in two, each of these beings desires to come together, and throwing their arms around one another and entangling themselves with one another in their desire to grow back together by nature, right? The word for grow together is to be by nature be fused back, right? And they begin to die off due to hunger and the rest of inactivity because they were unwilling to do anything apart from one another. Yes, it's very sad for them. And whenever one of the halves did die and the other was left, the one that was left tried to seek out another and entangle itself with that, whether it met the half of the whole woman, and that was what we now call a woman. So whether it was a woman who was once half of two women and then meets another woman, or of a man, and so they begin to perish. Okay, so the first cunning plan of the gods is we double the sacrifices and get rid of the problem. They're much less strong. Okay, so that's important. Our civilization in some sense weakens us. And everyone from Rousseau to Nietzsche and way on down from there always gives this testament to the notion that our genuine archaic nature is strong, right? And our civilized nature is weak, right? Which puts them in a very great difficulty when they want to describe the civilization that they want, but we can leave that aside. Okay, so the first cunning plan has failed, right? And then the next expression is meant to be amusing, but Zeus took pity on them and supplies another device. Now, why does Zeus take pity on them? What does Zeus's pity consist in?
Preserving them for his own benefit.
Yeah, they're dying. I'm losing my sacrifices. It should say Zeus's self-pity. Like Zeus took pity on himself, right? And supplies another device. He rearranges their genitals towards the front, for up till then they had it on the outside, and they generated and gave birth, not in one another, but in the earth, like cicadas. Right, so their sexuality in their original nature is abstracted from their behavior, right? And he's about to change that, right? And for this purpose, he has the genitals moved around. He changed this part of them towards the front, and by this means, A, he made generation possible in one another by means of the male in the female, so that in embracing, if a man meets with a woman, they might generate and the race continue. Okay, so we're keeping the numbers up, the sacrifices are preserved, right? And if male meets with male, there might at least be satiety in their being together. And the word is the same one that was the word used to describe why Aristophanes had hiccups. Right? He reached a certain degree of greedy fullness and he started hiccuping. These people reach a certain degree of satisfaction and then they can continue with, harvesting the wheat. So then they might pause and turn to their work and attend to the rest of their livelihood, that is their means of living. Page is moving around. Right, conclusion. So it is really from such early times that human beings have had inborn in themselves eros for one another. Eros, the bringer together of their archaic nature, their ancient nature, who tries to make one out of two and to heal their human nature.
Doesn't mention women and women.
We'll come to that. Okay, so we have human beings who are now upright and who now generate within one another. So they are now like the gods that made them. So the problem of who made who first is still open, right? But in both cases, we have human beings that are an image of the god, right? But in this case, the gods had to make them in their image. But where did the gods come from? This is a deliberate problem in the speech. Okay, so the conclusion of our ancient suffering, each of us then is a token, and a token is, there's a Greek word symbolon, which we have symbol, and I don't think this may or may not be the word here. It might be the one where they have the pair of dice. Where is it? Yeah, it's a symbolon. So a symbolon is, you have one piece of pottery with a mark on it and you break it in half and then you give that to someone and then, you know that this is the person who owes you money or they can give it to a friend. And but these two halves that fit together and only fit together with this one unique other half. And that's what's the word? Token. That's what the token here means. Like a broken off piece that can only fit together with one other piece. And this, the reason why Aristophanes' speech is, it's comic and tragic, but it has a certain power because in erotic desire of another human being, there is this sense, if someone's in love, they have the sense that it could only have been with this person, right? They're not thinking, well, of the people to whom I'm attracted in this city of whatever million people, there are 350,000 people of them, and I exclude 200,000 of them for reasons X, Y, and Z. That leaves 1 in 50,000 people whom I could have fallen in love with, and it happens to be you. Right? That's not what people think when they're in the throes. They think that that chance is excluded. Right? And this is a genuine part of the experience, and it's exactly what Aristophanes' speech appeals to, that the exclusion of arbitrariness in this passion. The problematic side of that, I hate the word problematic, the other side of that is that love of the other becomes a kind of love of oneself, and there's something difficult about that too, because he's going to characterize it as love of one's own. And we'll see where that leads shortly. Okay, we'll do one more sentence and then take a break. Now, he says, now all of those who are the men's slice from the common kind, genus, which was then called androgynous, are lovers of the best are lovers of women. Okay, so we have the androgynous kind, a male and a female whole cut, and the men become lovers of women, and many adulterers have been of this genus. Now, okay, so keep track of what the erotic inclination leads to, right? And in turn, all of those who are women of this genus prove to be lovers of men and adulteresses. And all women who are sliced off from women hardly pay attention to men, but are rather turned towards women, and lesbians arrive from this genus. Now, the word for lesbian is a unique word in ancient Greek, and lesbian is a guess of Liddell Scott Jones, modified and edited by Powell and West. So no one knows. It's associated with a lot of different words that could mean anything from companion to prostitute to lesbian to we don't know. Right? The latest Cambridge lexicon. There's a 2-volume intermediate Cambridge Ancient Greek lexicon. It just came out a few years ago, and their guess, they've got bracket PROB dot probable a woman who makes use of female prostitutes, and it's based on some of these other uses of the word heteros and heterisdor and so on. And so, but in any case, and that would work better for the following interpretive statement, which is that eros in each of these cases is for something that's socially illegitimate, right? It's sexual, but it's socially illegitimate. And that's why at the heart of our ancient nature is a kind of sexual licentiousness, which the gods have to control to make us civilized beings. Okay, we've gone directly through several pages. We should have a break and then discuss any questions and come back in 10 minutes. So please, if you have yeah.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Thank you. In relation to the text, we have the situation where Eros drives these split humans to undertake an activity which is detrimental in that they embrace each other and then end up starving to death.
Yes. Which
the gods then have to fix by rearranging the order of their various parts, which seems to put the gods in the role of fixing Eros, or what Eros does. Why then does Aristophanes say that Eros deserves the greatest sanctuaries and altars if what Eros does creates this disordered function in the split humans, which the other gods then need to fix?
Yes, so and this is you've put your finger on the central tension in his whole speech, which is on the one hand, he begins by saying, I'm praising Eros, which is the desire to be with one's other half, to resume our original nature. And that's in direct contradiction to the intentions of the gods, who want to A, split us, and B, have us live. There's a direct tension between his praise of Eros and his assertion, which he's going to make, that we must be pious to the Olympian gods. And what I think he's doing is he's attempting to expose an aspect of our original longing, to ridicule it, so that we can be reconciled with the world as it is, with the Olympian gods and their laws.
So his reference to Eros deserving the greatest sanctuaries and altars is perhaps just a bit of a... That's
abandoned. I mean, I'm suggesting that that gets abandoned by the end.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
But that's and this is, I think, this is Plato showing a real inner tension within Aristophanes' own thought. This was an aspect of this which I did not see until I read Strauss on Aristophanes' Clouds, we were just discussing. What he shows beautifully there is that Aristophanes has this very powerful, in every one of his plays, he's criticizing politics. These idiotic politicians are getting us into wars. They're spending all our money. Does any of this sound familiar? And they're corrupt, and our society is getting worse as a result. And what he looks back to is the Greeks, the Athenians and the Greeks, who beat back the Persians in the previous generation, in the greatest generation. I don't know if any of this is still sounding familiar, right? So what he appears to admire is the justice and courage of the previous generation, right? But then he admires that because they were largely small landholders, agriculturalists, right? And so then he's actually admiring the country life of you have to do a bit of work, but then you can enjoy country pleasures, wine, women, and that's the purpose. But that's intent. Those two are intention, developing the powerful martial spirit and the easy country life. And that's not that any farmers now live an easy life, but that is something like the problem here, because he appears to be saying, go back to this, we'll praise Eros, which leads us back to our genuine good, but that will destroy our current good, destroy our current situation. I haven't expressed that clearly. I hope to make more sense of it as we go. Now, I stopped just before he mentioned what Benedetti has amusingly translated as the cutlets of the male. This is at 191E4, but all who are male slices, and the way he's brought out well how he's really awkwardly expressed. There's a word for cut, temnor, and there's a word for a cutting, a temna, and he uses that to say, but the temna, that the male temna, but what he means is the male that is a cut of a whole. Yeah, but anyway, the male slice pursue males, and while they are boys, because they are cutlets of the male, they are friendly to men and enjoy lying down together with and embracing men. So this is the Pausanias side. And these are the best of boys and lads because they are naturally the manliest. Sorry, I just want to quickly check a word. Yep, they are naturally the manliest. Okay. Some, to be sure, assert that such boys are shameless, and that was one of the prejudices that Pausanias said Athens had. One of the laws, which is that, one of the laws or customs, which is that boys who took a lover, an older lover, were criticized for being shameless. And he said, I approve of this in the following respect. If they hold out for the statutory 5 months, then it's a good relationship, right? Okay, but yeah. Aristophanes says they lie, for it is not out of shamelessness that they do this, but out of boldness, manliness, and masculinity, feeling affection for what is like themselves. So two things. One, if boldness, manliness, and masculinity sounds like it's closer to our original nature, which does not sound good. Like there's just a hint that will lead us back into a rebellion, right? Okay, we'll come back to this. But also, they feel affection for what is like themselves. Now, what's going to happen in the course of the speech is that the substitute for what actually is ourselves, is our other half, is going to be what we take to be like ourselves, but not in our mind, right? And we'll come to that phrase. Okay, so, and there is a great proof of this. For once they have reached maturity, only men of this kind go off to political affairs, right? Now, he appears to be saying, praising the halves of men. They're more manly, they go into politics, right? Following sentence. When they are fully grown men, they are pederasts, they lovers of boys, and naturally pay no attention to marriage and procreation. So that's the side of Eros that I said before. Eros is characterized for each of these kinds, for the women, for the androgynous, and for the men in ways that are non-legal. What's the antinomial? So eros is always in tension. Genuine eros is always in tension with the law, with nomos. Okay, so they naturally pay no attention to marriage, which is the legally approved form of eros, and procreation, which is the beneficial form of eros for the society and the gods in this case. But they're compelled to do so by the law, by the nomos. So here we have the really explicit sense, eros versus nomos, nature versus law. Now, that's exactly Plato, right? Nature and law are in tension, but in this depiction, we can never, ever, A, articulate, and B, reach our nature. You can't live in accord with your nature. That would be to return to this original version, and the whole speech about ourselves being cut in half and so on, that's intended to show that we have our deepest longing is for a nature that is unintelligible and cannot exist. Exactly like Rousseau, right? And a lot of thought after Rousseau is an explanation of this. Like Rousseau in the Confessions, lying on his back on a raft in Lake Geneva, senses his oneness with existence, right? And that sense of himself is, for him, that was the peak of his life, right? Because it's not conscious. Because he agrees with Hobbes. We are not political by nature. Aristotle's wrong. Plato's wrong. We are not political. We are not communal by nature. But he says, Hobbes, Locke, you haven't thought this through. If we're not communal by nature, language is not part of our essential nature. Our genuine understanding of ourself is not articulate and discursive. It's our sense of ourselves. It's a feeling. And no one more powerfully articulated this than Rousseau, and he does it deliberately. And just as an aside, in the Republic, when Socrates is talking about what we are, at one point he says, I'm not talking about someone lying on their back in a raft sensing themselves. I don't know if Rousseau read that. I know he read the Republic and he said, this is the greatest book on education, and he means until me, but yeah, this is the greatest book on education ever written. So I think he was aware of that. But we have the starkest possible illustration of what a human being is. For Plato, it's Socrates and two boys talking about justice for 11 hours straight and forgetting about dinner. That's the peak of human nature. For Rousseau, it's lying on a raft sensing your existence. Nietzsche follows directly from that, right? We'd have no intelligible end. Our discourse, our laws, customs, blah, 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 all of that is a creation. Okay. Now, we got somewhere in Aristophanes' speech before I abstracted. Yeah, so they're compelled to do things like marry, procreate by law, whereas they would be content to live unmarried with one another. Now, it is one of this sort who wholly becomes a lover of youths and a passionate lover, always feeling affection for what is akin, what is one's own. Like akin is a very good translation of a Greek word, or chaos, that means of one's household, a relative, but of one's household, right? Something akin. So what we love, or what we have affection for, is our own. It's not beauty. Beauty doesn't play any role in Aristophanes' speech. And so I mentioned before that Diotima says to Socrates, there are lovers, people who are genuinely in love would look upon and be with, so these two aspects that are not mutually exclusive, but they are in tension with one another, because you can't do both. You can't contemplate and embrace at the same time, right? But the lovers will contemplate and be with their beloved and ignore eating and drinking, and that's a reference to these people here. But there's two aspects to eros, looking upon and being with. And here, the looking upon is always finding noble or beautiful the beloved. There's no mention of nobility or beauty in Aristophanes. He gives everything to being with. In the next speech, Agathon, he gives everything to beauty. Okay. Yeah, and when the pederast or anyone else meets with that very one who is his own half, so it doesn't matter if you're male, female, you're from the androgynous, you're from the two men, you're from the two women, all of them. When they meet the other half, they are then wondrously struck with A, friendship, B, attachment, which is this feeling of one's own, kinship, and C, eros, or love, right? Now, what is meant to be driving them towards one another is eros. But then when they meet someone who they take to be that which completes them, then they're struck with eros. Now, why is that? Open question. I'm assuming that at the very moment of the sense of completion in the embrace is the sense that there must be a parting, right? Even if it's only death, right? And that's why Juliet looks down to Romeo and sees him as if he's in a grave. Both things come together at once, the sense of the possible completion and the necessary parting, or the necessity that it not be the other half. It cannot be in principle. There is some aspect of arbitrariness. Okay. But when they meet, they are struck with friendship, a sense of one's own, right? And if you could, yeah, where are we? We're at 192C. Yeah, or KOTS. So it's the sense, the sense of one's own. And I think that would be, Benedetti's a classical genius. I don't want to criticize him, but if you put that there, friendship, the sense of one's own and love, I think that would be perfect, because the love comes from the sense of one's own. Okay, and then they are just about unwilling to be apart from one another even for a short time. And here you have those who continue through life with one another, though they could not even say what they want to get for themselves from one another. Now this is important, okay? This is the undermining of speech as characteristic of human beings. Their deepest thing, they can't speak, right? So all the speech and so on, that comes on top of this. That's secondary, derivative. Yeah. Okay. For no one would be of the opinion that it was sexual intercourse that was wanted, as though it were for this reason, of all things, that each so enjoys being with the other in great earnestness. But the soul of each plainly wants something else. So you can't be more explicit that eros, the longing for completion in the passionate desire for another, is not reducible to sex. Which leads to a conundrum, right? What is it? What it is, what they really want, it is incapable of saying, but it divines what it wants and speaks in riddles. Now, in Plato, the word divination and riddle mean not articulable in speech, but are apprehended in some way. So, Socrates, for example, says in the Republic, when he talks about the principle of the whole or the good, he says he divines that it is, right? And the mistake everyone makes is to say that it's something, it's a certain kind of being or something, and that he's saying, no, it's not that, it's that which gives the truth to everything, which can't be a thing, right? And so he says, I divine that. So it's an openness to something that is not rationally explainable. And Socrates also sometimes says, I have a daimonion. Alan, did you?
Yes. This reminds me just of this, in the way in which you can't speak about it, is what Wittgenstein said, isn't it? He said, whereof we cannot speak, thereof should we remain silent.
Yes, the problem is, the difference is that Socrates and Plato are saying, whereof we cannot produce, a complete discursive understanding is yet that which about which we must discourse the most. So Wittgenstein is saying, okay, you with your clumsy scientific logical methodology cannot reach what's genuinely high in human life. And I understand that, but then what happens is you leave that then, and if you say it cannot be touched, then what you're saying is, okay, and then that means that what is high has no defense. Right? And it becomes easily reducible by the scientists and so on. Whereas Plato is saying, no, what is high must be most defended. But they are in agreement, and this is where I think we're talking on the same, we're saying the same thing. They're both saying that the highest cannot be just presented in speech. It cannot become a straightforward object of discourse. Is that?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, Dan?
Yeah, so could you summarize the difference between Wittgenstein and Socrates there, or Plato there, as Wittgenstein holds that if we can't approach the transcendent on strictly our terms, then it ought to be let alone, versus Plato saying we may not be able to approach the transcendent on our terms, but nevertheless we ought to enter into relationship with it in some way.
What you're calling the transcendent is, for Plato, can be brought to some degree into discourse, even if it has the character of an image to reality. That which is most important to us should be made most noble to us. Now, if you're orientated by something, let's just say high, right? Mm-hmm. If you're orientated by that, then there are several possible orientations. One is, for example, you might have a sincere religious refusal to try to analyze it because you don't want to besmirch it, mm-hmm. right? That's not Plato's view, and not Socrates' view, which is that he doesn't want to besmirch the high, but he wants to make it as noble as possible because we're guided by it. Willy-nilly anyway. We're guided by what we take to be better rather than worse. And since we're betting our lives on it, it'd be good to try to understand that as much as possible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I meant by on our terms, in the case of Wittgenstein, pertained specifically to his style of philosophizing in the Tractatus, using very strict quantificational logic and breaking things down into the sort of constituent elements. Whereas I suppose there you're pointing to the fact that Plato is deploying a different kind of knowing, or a different kind of epistemic structure or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think he's saying with our tools, we can't get at what's most important. And all we'll do is besmirch it if we try. And that makes sense if those are the only tools. Mm-hmm. If we had, but then in the investigations, you have something like a radically incomplete Platonic dialogue. You have these aphorisms, more or less in length. They're like a cosmos of voices searching for a whole. Right?
So, yeah, if Aristophanes' deep truth is that we can't really talk about what is most essential to us.
Yeah.
He's giving us a very gorgeous
poem
explanation of why we can't
and
talk
he uses
about
the
these
word
things.
cause and form to do it.
Yeah. So is he a poet despite himself, despite what he really believes, or is it the other way around, that he doesn't really believe it?
I think it's B.
Okay.
So we've got this problem. So first of all, it's a brilliant poetic device for Plato to get him to talk about nature and form as being the first things, and then to say nature and form are not knowable. Right? That's brilliant. Like, he's getting the poet to articulate an anti-philosophical position in Plato's language. But then he's going to show that there's this tension with what you're then saying is fundamental, and your own speech as a poet, and your own existence as a lover, and your own existence as someone who upholds the community and the gods and the laws. Yeah, we still haven't got that fully, but that's that tension that exists in this. Yeah.
But it's like he doesn't need to say it because he's pictured it. He's given us the, I mean, we can feel the urge, that longing.
Yeah.
Because of the beautiful picture that
Yeah.
he used.
No, we don't need the.
We don't need.
All we need is the pictures to remind us of what we are and so on.
Yeah.
That's why the poets are the teachers, because they produce the paradigms and the pictures and the narrative, not because they produce arguments and speeches and nuance. Okay. Okay, then we have a little illustration of exactly what we're talking about. If Hephaestus, okay, so the god of making, there's two famous incidents in Homer with Hephaestus. One is when he constructs a world in book 23 of the Iliad, and he carves a shield for Achilles. The passage is known as the Shield of Achilles, and he produces a world in which you have a community in which there are judges deciding a case with witnesses and so on, and then you have a war, and you have a wedding, and you have a siege of a city. So you have these pictures, you have the picture of the whole human world and the gods. Athena's leading one army, Apollo's leading another, and then around the outside you have ocean. Now, who made that world? Hephaestus or the poet, right? That's the question I was suggesting at the beginning. Like, around the outside of the intelligible world is chaos, ocean, right? Just endless change and lack of form. And the concrete world is made by first answer, the gods. Second answer, the poet who made the gods, right? The second passage is when Hephaestus is being cheated on by his wife, Aphrodite, with Ares, the god of war. And he makes a device, because he's a device maker, a net that captures them in the act. And so they're naked before all the other goddesses, or before all the other gods and goddesses. All the other goddesses turn their back and go home. They don't want to see it, right? But then I forget who this is. Apollo, I think it's Apollo. Someone says to Apollo, clearly not Hephaestus, he says, what would you give to be caught in a net with Aphrodite? And Apollo says, I'd be happy to be laughed at by all the gods for an extremely long period in order to... So the Eros has triumphed over Nomos in this particular... Okay, so that's Hephaestus. So this is Hephaestus here. Hephaestus turns up with a bag of tools, right? So he's made Hephaestus into a cobbler, If Hephaestus were to stand over them, the pair of lovers, as they lay in the same place, and were to ask, what is it that you want, human beings, to get from yourselves from one another, right? Now, this is actually an interesting question. Like, if two people who are genuinely in love, embracing, what do they want? Well, they don't have, the one thing that would not explain that feeling is a list of things they want. There's no calculating, cold reasoning involved in this whatsoever, right? And so in one sense, it's an impertinent question. Okay, and if in their perplexity, so silence, there's no response, like, what are you talking about? If in their perplexity, he were to ask them again, is it this you desire? To be with one another in the same place as much as is possible, and not to leave one another night and day. For if you desire that, I am willing to fuse you and make you grow together by nature, right, together into the same thing, so that though two, you would be one. And as long as you lived, you would both live together, just as though you were one. And when you died, right, so if you're a pair and you come together, there is an eventual parting called death. There again in Hades, you would be dead together as one instead of two. So see if you love this, if you have an eros for this, and would be content if you got it. Okay, now the hint in the language is the problem. 2 into 1, which I believe was someone in a class in the States said, yes, the Spice Girls have made a song about this speech. Right, talking about being from 2 into 1 or what. Okay, the problem, if you were now a 1, you were no longer the one of the two, right? So the completion of the desire would be the utter extinction of the desiring being, right? And those first beings weren't characterized by any desire for one another. They gave birth in the ground, like, eggs are planted by the female and the male fertilizer, or I don't know how it worked, but they did not have an erotic attraction for one another, and that was probably partly why they had this desire to take over the gods and so on, because they were already this independent being. Okay, so that's the implicit problem in this otherwise golden offer. So Aristophanes resumes, we know that there would not be even one, right? A one that won't be preserved if they become a part of another one, right? A one who, if he heard this, would refuse, and it would be self-evident that he wants nothing else than this, and he would quite simply believe he had heard what he had been desiring all along, but couldn't articulate himself, right? Or herself. In conjunction and in fusion with the beloved, to become one from two. Yep, so not articulated until the Spice Girls. The cause of this, so cause, nature, form, the cause of this is that this was our ancient nature and we were whole. And now this is kind of the conclusion, this speech. So love is the name for the desire and pursuit of the whole, right? It's the desire for wholeness. And, when we looked at the painting by Auerbach, and there's Socrates talking to someone, and my suggestion is that that someone is Aristophanes, because in Socrates' speech, he says, some people say that what you desire is the whole, not the beautiful. But that's wrong for the following 14 reasons. So, and I think that's the most explicit moment of dialogue. So love is the name for the desire and pursuit of the whole, not reducible to sexual contact or anything. It's this longing for wholeness, longing for intimacy, or kaiotes, which means for one's own, for the completion of oneself. Okay. Yeah.
How is that reconciled to this notion that love and eros is about finding completeness, and which in that sense almost is a means to an end? Whereas when he's talking earlier about the nature of these split humans, he talks to them about them being adulterers and adulteresses, which means that it's not so much the having as the getting. You know what I mean? It's about, so where does this notion that, well, if you're androgynous, if you came from the androgynous type, you were doing this other half and then this other half and then this other half. How then a page later is he saying, well, it's all about, if you had the chance to join forever and subsume the two into one, people would want that. How does it, that?
Well, so yeah, from that for the first description of when he says what they're like when they're split, and he's the androgynous become adulterers, yeah. The ones who are women who become lesbians or visit female prostitutes, and the men become the lovers of youths and politicians, who he just, sorry?
It's all plural. They're all just doing it with everyone else.
Yeah. So yeah. So, but each of those activities is against the nomos, against the law, right? So eros, at the very least, ignores the laws of the gods in its essence. Right. It's a longing for completion, But then he says it's not reducible to sexual attraction, right? It's a kind of longing. Now, but that leads us, and therefore, in two directions. One, and this is what he spent a long time discussing, is when two do meet, and he says male, female, whatever, right? Whenever two do meet, someone they take to be their other half, they're struck with friendship, intimacy, and eros, right? And then he goes on to this account of, well, what do they really want, right? By that, in that emotion. And so we have a long account of what it is that they want from an example of when two lovers fall in love, right? But ultimately, though, what he's saying is that, okay, from eros, two things follow. One, from eros as he discusses it, if you can never meet your other half, it's either a kind of second best, or it's promiscuity, or there's no, because you can't find your other half, right? But then he's ultimately trying to reconcile us with the nomial, the lawful ways of the lawful eros. But that's in tension with what eros is. Yeah. I think that'll be, hopefully we're in the last paragraph, and I think the tension comes out a bit more clearer, and then we can develop it further. Okay, so this is at 193A4. He says, sorry, I'm going to go back to A2. And previously, as I say, we were one, but now through our injustice, we have been dispersed by the god. By which god? By Eros? By Apollo or Zeus, right? By the god, just as the Arcadians were dispersed by the Spartans. Now, lots of scholarly commentary here, because there was an event in about 384 BC. So, 30 years after the event of the Symposium at 416 BC, the day after Agathon had won the victory. But there was also an event prior to 416 where the Spartans attacked the Arcadians. In any case, it appears that in the second case, the 384, it could be an anachronistic reference. That's entirely possible. In this case, and that's described in Xenophon's history, which continues Thucydides's history after 411, where the Spartans, the Arcadians were originally on the Spartan side, but then they became a democracy like Athens. So Sparta attacked and divided them up into their ancient small villages, as opposed to letting them be a whole big political community. And that would actually fit this situation well, because they're being returned to a less civilized condition. They're being cut up again because of their, quote, injustice. So, anyway, we'll go on. At 193A4, there is the fear then. So fear is our motive for obeying the Olympian gods, clearly. That if we are not orderly in our behavior to the gods, to the Olympian gods, we shall be split again and go around like those who are modeled in relief on stelae, on memorial pillars for the dead, right? Soared through our nostrils like dice. That was another thing that people handed, like half a dice. You cut it in half and give it as a symbol, to token. For this reason, every real man, just the word for man as emphatically as opposed to a human being, must be exhorted. So, because they're the ones who are most rebellious. They enter politics and they become corrupt, and they try to transcend the law in a sense. Okay, so every man must be exhorted to be pious towards the gods in all his acts, so that we may avoid the one result of being cut up again, of being destroyed, and get the other, as Eros is our guide and general. The other result is that we meet our half, and this is going to be discussed. So, let no one act contrary to Eros, and he acts contrary whoever incurs the enmity of the gods. Why? Because we keep getting cut up, we'll be destroyed. Not because the gods lead us together, not because the gods want us to meet the end of our Eros. They don't. They want us to be divided. right? For if we become friends and reconciled to the gods, we shall find out and meet with our own favorites, which few do at the moment. Okay, so this is a middle statement. If we reconcile ourselves to what the gods have done to us, made us these divided beings, we can meet our genuine other half, right? Few people do that. Understatement. No one does it, right? In the literal sense. And he says, and please don't let Eryximachus suppose, in making a comedy of my speech, that I mean Pausanias and Agathon. Perhaps they have found their own and are by naturally born males. Now, this is a joke, because Pausanias and Agathon are infamously not particularly masculine. Agathon is, Aristophanes wrote whole plays, several whole plays, to try and mock the effeminacy of Agathon, right? And you'll see this in Agathon's speech, like he's a very delicate, soft human being. So he's saying, don't make a comedy of my speech by pointing to these two. A, they're not masculine. And B, I take it, it would be a comedy if you could meet your other half. It's not, it's a tragedy. Okay, so for whatever the cause may be with them, I am referring to all men and women. Our race, our kind, would be happy if we were to bring our love to a consummate end and each of us were to get his own favorite on his return to his ancient nature. So men and women, every single current being, if we met our genuine other half, we would have the perfection of our happiness, which he says few do, and I think that's an overstatement, right? Right, and if this is the best, right, and I take it from the details, that's impossible. The best is impossible, right? It must necessarily be the case that in present circumstances, things being what they are, that which is closest to it is the best. Now, this is a very delicate situation, right? There is one other half which you cannot meet. Then the closest thing to it is second best. Is it? Is it really? It is an image of the actual best the second best? I raise that as a question. You're looking at me funny. And that is to get a favorite, a beloved, whose nature is to one's taste. Where are we? We're at 193D. Okay, so yeah. It's a necessity since the present circumstances are what they are, that the best be what is closest to this, which is to meet your other half. And this best, this second best, is to win a beloved who is by nature katanun to oneself. Is by weight. Okay, so this is just a normal Greek expression, katanun. It just means according to your preference, as you like it, to quote a play title, right? As you like it, right? But it literally means according to your mind, right? But in the other understandings of eros in this dialogue, it's the mind's apprehension of beauty that causes you to fall in love. In Socrates' speech. So that's not the case here. It's not the mind's apprehension of some character in the beloved. It's just this inchoate longing for completion. So there is no beloved whose nature is according to your mind. That's why I'm suggesting that there's a problem about saying what the next best is. Okay, and were we to hymn the God who is the cause of this, we would justly hymn Eros. Now, is Eros the cause of this, or is Zeus? Right. But okay, so but we would justly, that's different from truthfully. We would justly hymn Eros, who at the present time benefits us the most by leading us to what is our own. Now, that's a very broad statement, which can mean one's own beloved, one's own household, one's own city, right? And in the future, he offers us the greatest hopes. Now, I take that expression to be what he actually offers us. Hopes, with absolutely no hope of fulfillment, right? Hopes, right? While we offer piety to the gods, he offers us the greatest hope to restore us to our ancient nature, while we offer piety to the gods out of fear, because we can be destroyed, and by his healing make us blessed and happy. Now, I'm trying to suggest that in what is otherwise a fairly smooth statement, right, the best thing for us at present is to honor Eros and the gods and be led to happiness. But I'm trying to suggest that there's a deep tension within that, because the happiness cannot be fulfilled, and if it were fulfilled, it would go against the character that the gods have given us as civilized human beings. So there's this deep tension in the characterization of Eros. And as Peter suggested at the beginning, the more complex version is available in Stanley Rosen, Plato's Symposium, what's it called? An Interpretation, I think. Plato's Symposium, first book, his first book, which is, I got to reread it and learn where I've made mistakes. But yeah, any last thoughts? We've got a couple of minutes.
So can I just ask, at the end, is he suggesting that because there is a tension, you have to sort of attempt a reconciliation, and to attempt the reconciliation between the two is to incorporate Eros to some extent into the religiosity of the prevailing nomos? Like you need to sort of have a ritual as though it is an Olympian god?
Yeah, well, he appears to be praising as most erotic the men who go into politics, but people have read this speech and said, but that's the object of all of his criticism in the plays. These ambitious politicians who get us into war and spend our money and so on. So why is he praising them here? And I think it is because he's not genuinely praising Eros. He's saying what you're suggesting, that our Eros must be moderated, and we must comport it with the laws and customs and the gods as we currently are constituted. But I think by making the comedy of our Eros, and this is why Plato is this ridiculous genius. Like if you read Aristophanes, for example, the birds, these two men are driven by Eros. They want to have a love affair without having the father of the youth they want to have an affair with being upset and so on. So they're going to found a new city in the clouds, right? And they starve the gods. They go above the gods, above Uranus and above Olympus, and they go between Athens and Olympus, and they stop the smells from the sacrifices rising. So they starve the gods in order to blackmail them to get what they want. And so what Aristophanes is doing in the plays is trying to show you a ridiculous version of human erotic ambition. And it makes fun of it because it fails and it's ugly and horrible things happen, but it's laughable because it can't actually harm us. And that's meant to content you with being a decent human being, being a cosmos human being, an orderly, restrained.
So really 193D is just the finishing touch on like Eros is unreachable in a full sense.
Basically. Yes, I think really, that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
But the way he puts it is if we're going to have everything. But I think it's admitted. And if you look back at like the greatest hopes, well, what is that hope of meeting your original other half? Is there any hope after one generation that you'll meet your other? No, there's not. Yeah. So I think it's meant to reconcile us rather than.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I reread the speech during the week, and every time I read it, there's things I've missed and allusions between phrases that I hadn't seen the last time. And Plato's whole 5 volumes are like that. It's just every time you read it, there's more, and I'm sure I've missed a lot. So so thank you for your attention. I'll stop the recording